Hi everyone, nice to be here. I'll tell you a little bit about where we're based. That would be actually fun to tell you. But today I'm going to tell you a little bit about unlocking the power of nature using AI. I'm a pure mathematician, computer scientist by background. I worked in multiple different areas: comparative genomics, molecular evolution, drug discovery, and then I came to the area of nutrition, where I found a massive problem waiting to be solved. But basically, I'm preaching to the choir here. We know very clearly that, okay, globally the world is aging, but really what's interesting, and the interesting part that I was focused on, was the global chronic diseases that are occurring due to very often what we eat or consume on a daily basis. We're talking weight, obviously, but diabetes, cholesterol, and so forth. And then when I came into this area, the thing I noticed was if you look at different products that we consume every single day, there've been a lot of evolution in terms of how it looks, how it tastes, the different colors, the brands, the stories. But really, the inside has not changed. We're working with the same ingredients within these products for the past 30 to 100 years. Literally, a lot of the ingredients currently used in every product we consume has been invented about 100 years ago, sometimes 30 for the young ones. And those were not invented with health in mind or the consumer of today in mind. They were invented for multiple purposes, mainly cost, taste, texture, nothing to do with health or promoting health or even just sustaining health. And when you look at it from a historical perspective, a lot of these ingredients, again, have been developed ad hoc, not with the consumer in mind. So starting this from my own background, I said, okay, why is this? Why is there a focus on the outside and not the inside? And the realization is that a lot of these ingredients take decades and decades to develop, very, very expensive. And if you look at the pharma industry to develop an active ingredient, it can recoup that cost eventually. But in this area, it's very hard to recoup the costs. And the skill sets are missing. So we have amazing branding, amazing products, but really the inside has not changed. Very, very hard to change the inside because it takes decades and literally costs hundreds of millions. And I've been in these consortiums globally, managing a lot of that research behind the scene. But really, when you look at it, I think the biggest driver for me starting to work in the area of nutrition was this. So if you look at food as one of the areas we consume every day, and this is the case for all other consumer goods as well, including personal care, etc., what we put on our skin every single day. But here we're focused on food. And if you look at food, today's food system is a value-destructive system. So if you look, it's 10 trillion, but really the biggest value destruction it has is the connection it has with health. And that's massive, about a 6.6 trillion loss in terms of health. And that's kind of unheard of. When I saw these numbers, I was shocked as well. I knew it was bad, but I didn't know it was as bad as this. Now, obviously, there are environmental impacts and others, but really the biggest is health. And if you segment those into different segments, you understand that there's 3 different parts to them. The biggest one, obviously, is what I was saying, those epidemics of metabolism. So that is metabolic disorders, like obviously weight, but also diabetes and glucose management globally. But also the other part is malnutrition and undernutrition. And I'm not just talking here about Africa, I'm talking literally about the US and other countries where a lot of the products we consume on a daily basis are not well positioned from a nutritional perspective and are causing massive issues on a global scale. And then the last one is linked to the antimicrobial resistance. And that's caused by directly the preservatives used in the daily products we consume. Lots of preservatives used across the board, both in creams, but also everything we consume daily, but also in our animal feed that passes through, obviously, and causing massive issues there as well. So these are issues that when I first started working in this field, the question is, how do we solve these issues? Because a lot of the health spam that is the talk of today and yesterday A lot of it, I think, can be altered by just altering the types of ingredients we consume on a daily basis. We put together a small kind of review in terms of how to do this, because, you know, the everyday, if we're going to work on lifespan and health span, it's really going after the everyday products we consume. It has a much bigger impact on us every day, on our lifestyle, than later therapies. So, so we know that nutritional interventions actually, it's proven scientifically, can alter our health, but also it's a cost-effective way, and it's an easy-to-implement way in terms of how do you improve diets and so forth. But the issue has been precision in all these things. I think Brian Kennedy mentioned when you're talking about natural ingredients, it's very hard to pinpoint what they do, very hard to understand the mechanisms and the different molecules within and what they do. And this is really where AI comes to play. That's where I came from, coming into this area, looking at it from a different point of view and saying, you know, a lot of these molecules that we're using, or ingredients that we're using, are actually a network of different molecules, and how they interact with human can be different. And trying to pinpoint and understand those different molecules within the ingredients. But really, I wanted to go through this because ultimately, there's a massive need for change from an ingredient perspective in the everyday products we consume. Currently, it's impossible with the current technologies. And the only way to really solve this is through bringing in new technologies like AI to be able to decipher that information within nature and to make it clearly available to humans, and clearly targeting different areas of health benefits that we're going after. So let me tell you quickly who we are. We're Neurotas. Our goal is to make everyday products greener, safer, and healthier. So healthier is really very important, but also the types of ingredients we make, we want them to be sustainable, both from obviously a cost perspective, but also from an earth perspective. A lot of them are plant-based ingredients, and I'll tell you a little bit about that. But really, it's about looking at the products of today and how to make them healthier in terms of replacing a lot of what's in them that is causing a lot of the harms that I showed you earlier, but also how to improve the effect they have on our health and our lifespan. We're focused specifically on a type of molecule called peptide. We look beyond the nutritional value of a product or our source material, and we look at the potential signaling power of those peptides. So peptides are what we're interested in. They're short proteins. They come obviously with a nutritional power, but on top of it, they come with a signaling power as well. Very quickly, again, just briefly, so you know who we are, we're working with the best, both from a company perspective in terms of co-development with them to change the ingredients within those industries, but also with major universities globally. We've track record. We started to publish some of the data. Initially, we were all in-house, but we started to publish some of the data. We've launched 2 ingredients, which I'll tell you about in a while. We've done about 13 human trials, 9 of which are double-blind placebo clinical trials, where we actually predict through computers activities of interest to today's problems, and we actually identify molecules that solve them. And we've carried out quite a lot of human clinicals on those. And then we have the largest data set of natural peptides known to humans. So we have obviously a very large data set of 6 trillion at the moment, but really we've narrowed it down to about over 6 million in nature, and we know exactly how those 6 million peptides act, what they do in the human body, how to get them from nature, how to produce them. Now, obviously, we're not going to develop all these peptides. We've developed very few. And then just for the anecdote, we're literally if you go out of this building, we have offices both in the US and in Ireland, but if you go out of this building, on your left-hand side, you'll see this office. That's our headquarters in Ireland. It's a combination of, you have our AI team is based there, our labs and cell culture are based there, all the operations of Neurotas, the proteomics lab, and also the production lab is based here. If you do want a tour, I put it just last night, but if you do want a tour of the office or the lab, please contact Audrey at that email above there. But it was literally 5 meters away, which was the shortest trip I took to any conference ever, which is really cool. So I want to tell you a little bit now about the technology. So the technology is called a magnifier powered by NP-Phi. NP-Phi stands for Neurotask Peptide Finder. And basically it's a technology that brings together 5 different inputs. It's constantly learning from those 5 inputs. One of the inputs is obviously testing of peptides. We're constantly testing peptides in the lab on different cells, different tissues, both synthetic peptides, so they are pure peptides that are identical to what you find in nature, but also mixtures of peptides. So these are the more natural mixtures of networks of peptides, so combinations of different peptides. There's hundreds of data points, hundreds of millions of data points there in terms of peptides assigned to a different functionality from an experimental perspective. So we've done 6 years of experiments proprietary to us all coming in there. We have another part which is proteomics and peptidomics, and basically what we do there is basically getting a lot of different sources from around the world and data mining them, looking at the different peptides and proteins they contain, and which ones are accessible, which ones are not. And that's really important. So that's where we're collecting a lot of what's in different plants that we consume. We're also going to start marine sources, which I can explain, etc. From a production perspective, this is very important because a lot of peptides we cannot actually produce or access naturally, and the goal here is to be able to access those different peptides. So we have a production lab where we're constantly trying to find ways to access different peptides in those different species. So for example, I'll give you an example. On the 6 trillion peptides currently that we're exploring, only 6 million of them are actually accessible. The others are not yet accessible. And when I say accessible means that you can use a natural way to actually get to the peptide and cleave it out of the protein. So that's really interesting. And then other areas, obviously data curation. We're constantly data curating the public domain to understand what's out there and bring it in a format that we can actually use. So these are publication, patents, and so forth. Clinicals, etc., and the computational AI. So based on those, the technology is a very dynamic technology. It has about 6 different steps, and each step feeds into the other. So we start with understanding what is the problem. Very much like pharma do, but we're bringing this into the area of nutrition because it has never been done this way in nutrition. Usually what happens is that something is discovered ad hoc in a lab and then retrofitted into an activity and a function and a product. But here we're doing it like pharma do. We start with a consumer in mind. So what is the problem of today? And I can tell you some of the problems we're trying to fix. Muscle atrophy, for example, metabolism, glucose metabolism, and so forth. So we start with a problem. We understand what the biological meaning of that problem is. So what are the pathways that you need to actually target and modulate? And then we go into the identification, and NP-Phi starts to identify new peptides that potentially could modulate those pathways. And then we go into a refining, which I can explain. I have a slide on refinement because that's important. So refining, and then we go into confirmation. So we have laboratories here where we confirm what the technology comes up with. So the AI will come up with predictions. We actually physically make those peptides in the lab and in the production lab, and then we test them in different cell-based and all the preclinical in a way. And then we go in to validate them. Once we're very happy with that validation then goes into human clinicals, and then we go into production, scaling the production. And everything's tied, so the AI is constantly learning, not from just the efficacy of the peptide in the cell, but it learns from all the different types of inputs, both from a clinical perspective, a production perspective. So the AI is not only capable now through the years of experimental data we put into it and hard work behind it, it's not only able to identify efficacy, but it identifies other things which I can explain right after. So like I said, the confirmatory tests are really starting with production. So we produce the peptides that the computer comes up with. It can say this plant has this peptide that would modulate, for example, sleep. Okay, and we have certain assays in the lab that look at different pathways. And we produce that peptide, we go and test it in the lab to validate it, using different techniques. We then validate it further once the ingredient is done. We have two types of peptides we produce. We produce synthetic peptides and naturals, like I said. The naturals, because of the source material and the way we produce them, we can immediately go into clinical, equivalent to a clinical phase 2B. So that's an efficacy clinical, bypassing the safety part. Through obviously ethics approval. So, and I'll tell you a little bit more about those. And we've started recently to publish some of the data as well. So this is the refinement. Refinement is actually the biggest part, or the most important part of the technology. So it allows us to go from the very large set of peptides that we currently have in our data sets to the one that's going to solve the problem that we're looking at. So we start off with about 6 trillion. Very quickly, we reduce it to 4.6 because these are the ones we can access and have potential in that area. And then we go through filters, and these are technical filters, like, for example, oral availability. Peptides are not known to be oral available in the literature from before, but really coming at it from a mathematical perspective, you realize that a lot of peptides that have been studied in the past are hormonal peptides, which should not be actually orally available. So there's a bias in terms of the literature for those types of peptides. But when you look at the bigger space of peptides, which is the largest space known to humankind, you can realize that a lot of, you can find peptides that are orally available, and we've built filters for those from an AI perspective. So the AI is not just looking for efficacy, it's also looking to stack other functionalities that are very important. Oral availability. Obviously, what we're focused on initially with our AI system is the consumer world. So it's the food, the personal care, everything we use on our skins, in animal feed and human food is very, very important for us. So taste is important. So unlike in the pharma industry. The technology obviously can be applied in pharma. We do work with pharma, but the products we develop are focused on the consumer space because we feel there's a massive need there to be solved. And no one really is doing it. So taste is important, scalability and heat stability. So a lot of these ingredients, our peptides are going to be baked potentially, so they need to resist high heat. We've built filters for those from an AI perspective, cell penetrating when needed, for example, from a personal care perspective and so forth. Patentability, cost needs to be pretty surveyed from the very beginning because if the cost is too high, it can't penetrate different industries. So those filters are not filters we just speak about. We literally built predictors for each. And by saying we built a predictor, this is not just we've built a software. We had to actually experimentally create a lot of data, for example, for oral bioavailability, where we tested bioavailability of peptides, which ones die, which ones don't in real life, and build predictors based on those. So that's 6 years of data creation, not only from an efficacy perspective, but from all these filters as well. So again, it's really interesting because this year, this is the first year we can actually say this. We couldn't say this before. The second panel, we could say it maybe 2-3 years ago, but the third one is something that's just literally two months old. Because we've done so many clinicals now, we can start predicting the efficacy of an AI system to predict something that actually works in human, which is fantastic. So here we know that 64% of peptides that we digitally predict through NPFI, the technology, 64% of those actually work in real life. So when you produce them, they actually work. And here the 64% encompasses two things. It encompasses efficacy on cells, obviously, and the in vitro, all the in vitro work, but also scalability. So can we actually produce the ingredient naturally? Because like I said, a lot of peptides cannot be produced naturally. So 64% encompasses efficacy, but also scalability. And then when we go now, because we've done so many clinicals with the peptides we've produced, we can look at how many of those have succeeded, showing significant differences and how many have not. And here we show that 80% of the neurotask peptides that have come through the system actually are clinically tested and show efficacy. which is fantastic again and unheard of in this industry. To say that an AI brain trained through many years of multiple different data inputs can now based on a pathway or a target, can go into nature and identify molecules there and tell you how to make them naturally. And then that not just works in cells, but actually physically works in a human being, which is, again, a big milestone for us as a company and all the scientists that are working on it. So I'll give you a case study. What am I talking about? Okay, so all this is great, but really reality kicks in when you say, okay, Nora, so this is great, but what are we talking about? So I told you we work in different, it's a platform technology, so we can work on different health areas. One of these is muscle health in general. So muscle is a very important organ. It's the largest organ we have. It's our mobility engine, strength, metabolism hub, energy, like everything's really connected to it. And actually, funny enough, aging, it's the one that we see visibly age, so all the sagging and outside, obviously, this is just visible, but the impact of aging of a muscle cell obviously impacts metabolism and other areas, but the outside is important as well, and muscle is a very important organ, and basically we looked at what currently exists on the market today in the consumer world in terms of muscle health. And basically what's currently used is animal derived proteins, so that is whey or casein, so milk concentrates are used by the globe, so Abbott and Nestle, etc. When you're on your dying bed, literally, when nothing is working anymore, they'll give you shakes with lots of protein, hoping that you recoup your strength. But also from a sports nutrition, all the way from early on when you're young, all the way to later stages, that's really the standard. Obviously amino acids and so forth, but really it's all coming out of the animal. So, and plants are not known to be as orally available as animal-derived ingredients. So plant protein is not well known to be a good competition to that. So it's never been. But we went out to find a protein that was plant-based, that was better than that, but also showed efficacy from a clinical perspective. We carried out a lot of different tests, but really the focus here was different pathways that we wanted to modulate. So muscle loss, so protein degradation, we wanted to minimize that and augment protein synthesis, but keeping that balance healthy, and also reducing systemic inflammation. So those are the three pathways we went after. And this is the beauty about a lot of these natural ingredients is because you can look for synergistic effect targeting different pathways as opposed to one target. Because in general, aging is a very complex area and it's not a one-target solution. So we went after those. I won't go into any details there, but we went after some of those targets to modulate those. And the AI system came up with solutions, but before I get into some of the results, I just want to say we've carried out quite a few clinicals, 2 so far. Still in younger populations, we are going to go into a sarcopenia population soon, but also a woman menopausal population as well, because a lot of menopause comes with a lot of issues, one of which is loss of muscle. But literally we worked with Professor Van Loon from Maastricht, who's a massive key opinion leader within this area of muscle atrophy, and also Dr. Andy Franklin, who's an exercise medicine specialist. And together what we did is build 2 clinicals. With Van Loon, it was literally casting individuals for a week and then taking off to create muscle atrophy, and then taking off the cast and looking at recovery. And then with Andy Franklin, it was more focused on exhaustion, so taking people to exhaustion and then looking at their strength, looking at their fatigue, et cetera, et cetera. Again, in a younger population, but the basics are the same. If we go back, so we went head-to-head in some of the clinicals with the current animal-derived proteins to show that we are obviously a lot better in the areas they're focused on. But we also show other areas that the ingredient is specifically designed for. So numbers like up to 148 more strength recovery, reduce muscular fatigue by 47% and so forth. So these are really interesting to see, and there's a lot of these numbers that are coming out of the clinicals. Less circulating inflammation, stronger, more protein synthesis and more muscle production and so forth. But really for us, what was interesting was starting with a problem and using AI to get us to the solution, and knowing the actives within. So understanding what are the 3 or 4 molecules within that mixture that are actually performing that activity to scale it. And then obviously we have multiple others. So PeptiStrong has been recently launched. PeptiYouth is another one in the aging arena, but really we have others behind the scene. I'll just talk about 2. PeptiForce is this one that we've focused on for glucose management. We've done 1 trial with that one, and we're going into a next human clinical trial in the US with a large population. Peptide is an anti-inflammatory. Again, we've done 1 trial, a pilot trial in that area, and going into a second one at a lower dose. But again, all these have been invented through AI, understanding exactly the molecules within. PeptiStrong, by the way, comes from fava bean. And we get very often the question, if you eat fava bean, would you get the benefit? And the answer is obviously not, because the peptides are within. The proteins, our body just breaks them up randomly. But when you really identify the peptide and release it in a way and make it orally available, that's when the activity appears. So PeptiStrong is fava bean, for example. PeptiForce is from pea. Peptide is from rice husk, and so forth. So we focus on plants that actually are there, but peptides that today, even though they've been there for hundreds of years, today we have not been able to access those benefits as humans. And then one last project that I would mention is one project with a colleague of mine and Rob Bradford, who I think is here. If you want to speak to him, maybe raise your hand, Rob. Great. This one is on aging. It's funded by Enterprise Ireland, and here we're going to really focus on discovering a natural senolytic peptide to address cellular aging, and the other one is really upregulating mitochondrial biogenesis, promoting muscle health. So these 2 are supported by Enterprise Ireland and led by Rob. And I just want to finish off by saying we focused on plants, but really we're moving to a lot of different sources, materials, because there's a lot out there. Mainly marine sources, fungal sources, bacterial sources, to widen the space of peptides we're looking at. And I just want to finish off by saying that if you do have human clinicals running in some of the areas we're in, would be nice to have a discussion in terms of putting our ingredients within those clinicals that you're running as well. Thank you. Thanks.